My wife joked the paternity test I took was silly insecurity. It showed I wasn't the father. Then I had her lower security tested using a spilled drink DNA sample. It was a match. I presented both tests to her lawyer when she demanded child support. Her lawyer was speechlessly calling her. I, 34M, thought I had everything figured out. 10 years of marriage, what I believed was a solid relationship, and our beautiful daughter, who just turned 8. Looking back now, maybe I should have seen the signs earlier, but love has a way of making you blind to the obvious. The suspicion started creeping in about 6 months ago. My wife had been working late more frequently. Her phone suddenly required a passcode she'd never used before, and she'd become oddly defensive about the most innocent questions. When I'd ask about her day, she'd give vague answers and quickly change the subject. The intimacy between us had dwindled to almost nothing, and when I tried to discuss it, she'd brush me off saying she was just stressed from work. The breaking point came during a casual conversation with my neighbor. He mentioned how much our daughter looked like my wife's brother, joking that genetics were funny that way. Something about his comment stuck with me, gnawing at my thoughts for days. I started really looking at my daughter, studying her features with new eyes. The more I examined her face, the more I realized she didn't share any of my physical characteristics. Not my eyes, not my nose, not even my hair texture. She was the spitting image of my wife's family. I tried to shake off these thoughts, telling myself I was being paranoid. But the doubt had taken root and was growing stronger each day. Finally, I decided to do something that felt both necessary and terrifying. I ordered a paternity test online, telling myself it would put my mind at rest and I could move forward with confidence in our relationship. When I mentioned to my wife that I was considering a paternity test, her reaction was immediate and harsh. She laughed, but it wasn't a warm laugh. It was cold and mocking. She told me I was being ridiculous and that my insecurity was showing in the ugliest way possible. She said she couldn't believe I would even entertain such thoughts after all our years together. Her response made me feel guilty for even considering it, but something in her eyes betrayed a flicker of panic that she quickly masked with indignation. Despite her protests, I went through with the test. The waiting period felt like an eternity. Every day that passed, I found myself watching my wife more carefully, noting her reactions to my presence, the way she avoided certain conversations, how she seemed to be building walls between us that hadn't been there before. When the results arrived, my world collapsed. The test confirmed my worst fears. I was not the biological father of the child I had raised and loved as my own for 8 years. The paperwork felt heavy in my hands as I read and reread the results, hoping somehow I had misunderstood. But the science was clear and undeniable. I sat in my car in the driveway for over an hour, trying to process what this meant. 8 years of bedtime stories, scraped knees I'd bandaged, school plays I'd attended, birthday parties I'd planned, all based on what I now knew was a lie. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever imagined possible. But instead of confronting my wife immediately, something inside me shifted. I realized I needed to know the complete truth before making any decisions. If she had been unfaithful, I needed to know with whom and for how long. More importantly, I needed to protect myself legally for what was inevitably coming. That's when I remembered her brother. The same brother my neighbor had mentioned, the one our daughter supposedly resembled so strongly. Her brother visited frequently, sometimes staying for dinner when I worked late. They'd always been close, perhaps too close for siblings. Conversations would stop when I entered the room. They shared inside jokes I never understood. Little things that seemed innocent at the time now took on a sinister meaning. I began to formulate a plan. I needed a DNA sample from her brother to confirm my growing suspicion, but I had to be careful about how I obtained it. Fortunately, her brother was a regular at family gatherings, and with my wife's birthday approaching, I knew he'd be at our house soon. During my wife's birthday dinner, I played the role of the perfect host. I served drinks, made conversation, and waited for my opportunity. Her brother was always careless with his drinks, setting his glass down and forgetting about it while he talked. When he stepped outside to take a phone call, I carefully collected his glass and saved a sample from the rim where his lips had touched. The second DNA test was more nerve-wracking than the first. This time I knew what I might find, and the implications were staggering. If my suspicions were correct, this wasn't just adultery. It was something far more disturbing that would destroy multiple families and relationships. When those results came back positive, confirming that her brother was indeed the biological father. I felt a mixture of vindication and disgust that made me physically ill. The betrayal was complete and more twisted than I had imagined. My wife hadn't just had an affair. She had been intimate with her own brother and had passed off their child as mine for nearly a decade. I spent the next several weeks quietly consulting with a divorce attorney and getting my affairs in order. I opened a separate bank account, gathered important documents, and prepared for the storm I was about to unleash. My lawyer advised me to document everything and to be prepared for my wife to become hostile once she realized her deception had been discovered. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday evening. My wife was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I walked in with both DNA test results in my hand. I didn't say anything at first, just placed the papers on the counter in front of her. She glanced down at them casually, then did a double take when she realized what she was looking at. Her face went through a series of changes: confusion, recognition, fear, and finally a desperate attempt at defiance. She tried to grab the papers, but I pulled them back. She demanded to know how I had obtained her brother's DNA, and I explained about the glass from her birthday party. She accused me of being sick and paranoid, but her voice was shaking and she couldn't meet my eyes. I told her I wanted a divorce and that I would be filing papers the following week. That's when her demeanor changed completely. The fear and guilt were replaced by calculation and anger. She told me she would take me for everything I was worth in the divorce, including alimony and child support. She said no judge would deny a child financial support regardless of paternity, and that I had been the legal father for 8 years. Her threats didn't surprise me. My lawyer had warned me this would be her likely response. What did surprise me was how cold and calculating she became, as if a switch had been flipped. The woman I thought I had married was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. The next few days were tense and uncomfortable. We barely spoke except for the necessities of daily life. She consulted with her own attorney and began making demands about the division of assets and ongoing support. Through her lawyer, she insisted that regardless of biological paternity, I was legally responsible for child support since I was listed on the birth certificate. That's when my attorney and I decided to present our evidence. We scheduled a meeting with her lawyer, supposedly to discuss settlement terms. I brought both DNA tests with me, properly documented and certified by the testing laboratory. Her attorney's reaction was exactly what I had hoped for. When I presented the first test showing I wasn't the biological father, he seemed prepared to argue legal paternity versus biological paternity. But when I presented the second test showing that her brother was the father, his entire demeanor changed. The color drained from his face as he read the results. He looked back and forth between the two tests several times, clearly trying to process the implications. Finally, he excused himself from the room, and I could hear him making a phone call in the hallway. His voice was raised, and he seemed to be asking a lot of questions. When he returned, he looked shaken. He told me he needed to consult with his client before proceeding with any negotiations. The meeting ended abruptly, and I could tell he was deeply uncomfortable with what he had learned. Update 1. Later that evening, my wife's phone rang constantly. I could tell from her side of the conversations that her attorney was calling repeatedly, and she was becoming increasingly agitated with each call. She kept insisting that the tests must be wrong, that I must have somehow tampered with them, that this couldn't be happening. But I could see in her eyes that she knew the truth had finally come out. The house of cards she had built was collapsing, and there was no way to stop it. Her brother had apparently been contacted by the attorney as well, because she received several frantic calls from him throughout the evening. The next morning, her lawyer called my attorney to inform us that they were withdrawing their demands for child support and alimony. He also mentioned that his client was considering seeking counseling to address some personal issues that had come to light during their discussions. Update 2. Within a week, my wife had moved out of the house and was staying with a friend across town. Her brother, who had been such a constant presence in our lives, was nowhere to be seen. I heard through mutual friends that he had taken a sudden job transfer to another state and had moved away without much explanation to his family. The divorce proceedings moved forward quickly once the DNA evidence was presented. My wife's attorney seemed eager to settle everything as quietly as possible, and there was no longer any discussion of ongoing financial support. She agreed to a division of assets that was favorable to me, and more importantly, she didn't contest my decision to have no ongoing relationship with the child. This part was the most difficult for me emotionally. Despite everything, I had raised this child for 8 years and loved her deeply. But I realized that maintaining a relationship would mean staying connected to the deception and betrayal indefinitely. It would also mean potentially exposing the child to the disturbing truth about her parentage when she was old enough to understand. Update 3. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. My ex-wife and her daughter moved to another city, reportedly to be closer to her family, though I suspect it was really to escape the shame and whispers in our community. Word had gotten out despite our efforts to keep things quiet, and the nature of the situation had become local gossip. Her brother never returned to visit the family, and I heard he had cut off contact with most of his relatives. The family gathering and holiday traditions that had been such a big part of our lives were apparently disrupted permanently. Several family members reached out to me to apologize for what had happened, though they seemed as shocked and disturbed by the revelation as I had been. As I sit here now, 6 months after everything came to light, I'm still processing what happened to my life. 10 years of marriage, 8 years of fatherhood, all built on a foundation of lies and deception that was more disturbing than I could have imagined. I've started therapy to help deal with the trauma and betrayal. My therapist has helped me understand that my decision to investigate my suspicions wasn't paranoid or insecure. It was an appropriate response to genuine red flags that I had been ignoring for too long. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't insisted on the paternity test. Would the charade have continued indefinitely? Would I have spent the rest of my life unknowingly supporting and raising the product of such a disturbing relationship? The thought makes me grateful that I trusted my instincts, even when they led me to such an unpleasant truth. The hardest part isn't the end of my marriage. It's accepting that the woman I loved never really existed. The person I thought I married was a carefully constructed facade, hiding someone capable of the deepest possible betrayal. Not just the betrayal of adultery, but the betrayal of allowing me to believe I was a father when she knew the disturbing truth about her daughter's parentage. I've moved to a new city myself now, starting fresh where nobody knows my story. I've learned to trust my instincts again and to not ignore red flags in the name of love or loyalty. The experience has changed me fundamentally, but I believe it's made me stronger and wiser. Looking back, I realized that the DNA test wasn't just about confirming paternity. It was about reclaiming my right to the truth. Everyone deserves to live their life based on honest information, not elaborate deceptions maintained by people who claim to love them. My ex-wife probably thought she could manipulate the situation even after being caught, using legal technicalities and emotional manipulation to maintain her financial security. What she didn't count on was my determination to uncover the complete truth, no matter how disturbing it might be. The irony isn't lost on me that her mockery of my insecurity was actually her panic at being discovered. Her laughter and dismissive comments were defensive mechanisms, trying to shame me into backing down from pursuing the truth. If I had listened to her and abandoned my suspicions, I would still be living a lie today. Instead, I'm free. Free from the deception, free from the toxic relationship, and free from unknowingly supporting such a disturbing situation. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating in ways I never expected. The DNA tests weren't just pieces of paper. They were keys that unlocked my prison and gave me back control over my own life. Sometimes the most uncomfortable truths are the ones we need most desperately to discover.